In Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, archaeologists and forensic scientists are trying to solve a mystery. They have found thousands of unidentified bodies buried in a mass grave. They finally make a discovery that provides positive identification: buttons from soldiers' uniforms. After closer examination, archaeologists are able to pinpoint which army the soldiers belonged to. This was the army of one of the greatest military leaders in European history, Napoleon Bonaparte. In the aftermath of the French Revolution, this one-time artillery lieutenant from Corsica rose through the ranks, crowned himself Emperor of France, and conquered much of Europe. But Napoleon was not satisfied. In 1812, Russia still lay beyond his control. 5 years earlier, Napoleon and the Tsar of Russia had signed an alliance against England, Napoleon's archenemy. But the Tsar defied Napoleon by continuing to trade with England. Now for Napoleon, it's payback time.
Conquest has made me what I am, and conquest alone can maintain me.
By June 1812, Napoleon gathers the largest army Europe has ever seen. It includes 500,000 men, 140,000 horses, and countless supply wagons. Back in Vilnius, Dr. Rimantas Jankauskas, an anthropologist at Vilnius University, has put together a startling portrait of Napoleon's invasion force.
An illustrative majority was prevailing young males 20 to 25 years. Just few of them, less than 10%, were younger than 20, but some of them are as young as 15 years.
Napoleon thinks he's prepared for anything Russia can throw at him. He reassures his generals he will defeat the Tsar in less than 2 months, long before the dreaded chill of the Russian winter. Napoleon spends 3 months chasing the Tsar's army across Russia towards Moscow. Intelligence reports say the Tsar is in the Russian capital to supervise its defense. The Tsar's scorched earth policy prevents the French from supplementing their supplies by living off the land. After 3 months, Napoleon's army is suffering a devastating toll.
At the beginning, you had heat exhaustion. You had dehydration. During the first part of the campaign, the weather was hot and it was dry. You had exhaustion. You had rainstorms that muddied the roads up and caused wagons to be left behind and to collapse and soldiers to be stuck. As the campaign continued, you began to have diseases.
The French finally reach Moscow on September 15, 1812, only to find it completely deserted. To Napoleon's amazement, the Russians have set fire to the city rather than allow the French to occupy it intact. As Moscow burns, Napoleon realizes that he will not be able to feed and supply his army through the long Russian winter. He is forced to think the unthinkable: retreat. On October 19, 1812, the French begin the daunting 1,000-mile retreat from Moscow. The line of troops is 50 miles long, and the worst of the Russian winter lies ahead.
There are a couple of his vertebrae, backbones, that have traces of fractures from pressure.
Dr. Jankauskas has also found evidence of the French soldiers' grueling pace.
This is a case of so-called marsh foot. That happened from heavy physical load. Bones were breaking because of tiredness.
The forensic evidence confirms reports that the French soldiers set a blistering pace, up to 25 miles a day, carrying 60-pound packs. Conditions rapidly begin affecting the troops, and tens of thousands of French soldiers either freeze or starve to death. Disease kills thousands more, yet Napoleon still refuses to concede defeat, as one of his soldiers recorded.
It seemed as if the Emperor were expecting some miracle to alter the climate and end the ruin that was descending on us from every side. Alas, the Emperor deluded himself, and our ruin followed on his misfortune.
When his army reaches the town of Vilnius, only about 20,000 of the 500,000 troops that began the doomed march to Moscow remain. Less than 2 years after Napoleon leaves Moscow, Tsar Alexander leads an army into Paris and forces him to abdicate. Long before his decisive defeat at Waterloo in 1815, Napoleon's losses in the frozen wastes of Russia would determine his fate. In fact, he lost 10 times more men in the Russian campaign than at Waterloo. After the retreat from Moscow, his grand army is only a memory, and his power fades with it. Less than 9 years later, Napoleon will die on the remote island of St. Helena. So far, 3,000 bodies from Napoleon's lost army have been found. But if Russian historical accounts are accurate, there are another 34,000 bodies of Napoleon's soldiers in Vilnius yet to be discovered. What Russian action prompted Napoleon to launch his invasion of Russia? A. Russia broke an agreement and traded with England. B. Russia joined the Continental System. C. Russia formed an alliance with Austria. D. Russia planned to attack the Grand Duchy of Warsaw. What strategy did the Russians use against Napoleon's army? A. They planned a surprise attack at Vilnius. B. They used a naval blockade to prevent Napoleon's retreat. C. They burned Russian farmland and towns to stop the French from acquiring supplies. D. They negotiated a ceasefire and the surrender of Moscow. How are archaeologists, forensic scientists, and historians able to reconstruct the story of Napoleon's invasion of Russia?